Last month, we took our youngest son to college, and since then, my wife Maggie has been pestering me to go to this resort for a week. Repeat what kind of resort it is, I asked. It's basically a week-long counseling session, sometimes together, sometimes separately. The counselors will analyze every aspect of our marriage. The grounds are beautiful, the food will be delicious. It's 4 stars. Jack, this will help strengthen our marriage, she said. I didn't know our marriage wasn't strong enough, I objected. You don't understand how important this is to me. For the first time in 28 years, I won't have children to take care of. Many marriages fall apart at this point, and I don't want ours to be one of them, she argued. To keep the sarcasm from getting the better of me, I agreed to go. The next day, she called me at work to give me the dates, and I submitted my vacation request, which was quickly approved. On Monday morning, we were both silent during the 3-hour drive. In fact, we hadn't spoken in the last 12 years. With its long driveway, the place looked stunning. A large old mansion in the Gregorian style, surrounded by manicured lawns and fountains. It looked like it belonged to a golf club, but Maggie had already told me there was no golf here. There was a beautiful swimming pool and a gym. The first problem was that we had to hand over our cell phones to the resort staff. Maggie begged me not to make a scene. You know I have a dozen projects, and my employees need to be able to reach me if there are any problems. I'm sorry. I forgot to tell you about the cell phone policy, Jack, Maggie said. Can't you think of something? We need this, Jack. I'll call from the car. You can't call from the car, Jack. The valet took it, and we won't get it back until the end of our stay. What the hell, Maggie? Is that another thing you forgot to tell me? So we're going to be stuck here like prisoners for a whole week? It's so people stay involved in the process and don't run away. And when do we get out of prison? Sunday at noon, Jack. Please, Jack, don't look at it that way. I sat down on the steps in front of the entrance and started making phone calls. First to my secretary to tell her I would be unavailable all week. She had been pestering me about this marriage retreat ever since I told her about it. When I told her we'd have our phones taken away, she laughed. And when I told her we wouldn't be let out until noon on Sunday, she hung up. When she finally got back on the line, she said she had to go because she had wet herself. When she stopped laughing, I asked her to call Peter Gray and tell him to keep working on all 3 projects we were working on, and that I would be ready by noon on Sunday. Then I called my right-hand man and listened to him laugh. I told him he would be in charge this week. My boss laughed the loudest and asked if I wanted him to get me out of marriage prison. Then I turned off the phone and handed it to one of the guys in a white tracksuit. They all seemed to be dressed in white tracksuits, like characters from a science fiction movie. Maggie grabbed my arm, and several employees took our bags and escorted us to our room. The room was luxurious. A large king-size bed, a balcony overlooking the grounds, and our own private dining room. The bathroom was bigger than our living room at home. We had our own gym with one of those fancy exercise bikes attached to a huge flat-screen TV. I had always wanted one. Cycling was my favorite sport, but the weather and work didn't allow me to ride my bike more than a couple of times a week. We had to order dinner and unpack our things. As soon as that was done, I got on the bike. I loved that thing and was so into it that I didn't want to stop. 2 hours later, Maggie had to ask me 3 times to get off the bike to eat dinner. She was furious because I had ruined her plans for the evening. I reminded her that she hadn't told me about any plans. After dinner, we had our first meeting with the guru who ran the place. Maggie was furious that I hadn't taken a shower after my workout. The meeting with the guru went as expected. He spent an hour talking about how many couples leave the resort with renewed energy in their marriage. I asked him how many couples leave without renewed energy. Maggie hit me on the arm. I thought it was a fair question. Then he asked us to tell him about ourselves. Maggie started talking about how our marriage had become boring in recent years and that she hoped this week would bring back the spark. He turned to me and I said, "Our marriage has been the same for over 12 years. We're both over 50. I'm not looking for a spark. I want to retire and see the world." Mr. Guru said, Well, it's not uncommon for couples to come here with different goals. But that's what we do here. We bring those goals together. We were dismissed, and as we were leaving, I saw an elderly man walking away who looked familiar. I asked Maggie if she knew him, and she said no. I didn't like her no. When we got back to the room, there was a bottle of wine on the table. We poured ourselves a glass, and I went to take a shower. When I came out, Maggie suggested we watch a movie together. She chose The Bridges of Madison County. If you haven't seen it, Clint Eastwood comes to town to photograph covered bridges and has an affair with one of the local women while her husband is away. I think I fell asleep last time, and after working out and drinking wine, I fell asleep before the movie was even halfway through. I'll finish watching it someday. On Tuesday morning, we split up, and I was taken to a conference room with a computer. I was asked to fill out a questionnaire. There were probably 200 questions. They wanted to know when I had my first sexual experience and with whom, but I couldn't remember her name or when it was. How many women had I been with? Maybe 10. Had I had sexual relations with other men? That was easy to answer. No. Had I ever been married? Again, no. When was the last time I had sex with my wife? Many years ago. How often do I have sex with my wife? Never. Then the questions started again, but in a different format. It was an old psychological trick to see how consistent you were in your answers. Then I had to meet with one of the counselors to discuss my answers. He asked me some stupid questions, like why I couldn't remember who I had sex with for the first time. We were at a party, she was drunk, I was drunk, she was easy. Maybe I knew her name before I slept with her. But 40 years later, I couldn't even tell you what she looked like. Then he focused on my sex life with Maggie. You said you haven't had sex with your wife in many years? Yes, I answered that 12 times when you asked me that question. Why so long? I can't remember the last time I found Maggie physically attractive or appealing in any way. Then why do you stay married to her? I'm sorry. I always thought marriage was more than sex, that it was two people who cared about each other and raised children together. Maggie never complained. I found it strange that my answer made him fall silent. After lunch, we had another question and answer session, but I skipped lunch and spent another 2 hours on my bike. Maggie was angry that I didn't have time to shower before the next interview. The questions and answers were about sex between men. I answered no to all the questions and didn't get the job. On Wednesday morning, I found myself back in the same conference room with the same terminal. 200 questions began with, have you ever been unfaithful to your wife and how many times? No and never. If you had been unfaithful to your wife, would you expect her to forgive you? No. Do you know if your wife has ever been unfaithful to you? Number. If she had been, would you forgive her? It depends on the circumstances. That was the general theme of the questionnaire. The same questions were asked over and over again. The interview began with the question, why have I never cheated on my wife? I'm sorry, I thought that would be a normal answer. You travel a lot for work, don't you? Have you ever been tempted to cheat on Maggie? No, and I'm offended that you would ask that. Maggie and I made a vow, and I honor it. I've never put myself in a position where I could be tempted. During the day, I focus on my work, and in the evening, I don't go to bars and prepare for tomorrow's meetings. He seemed stunned again. You said it depends on the circumstances. Why would you forgive Maggie if she broke her vow? I'm an engineer. Before I make a decision, I analyze all the facts, all the alternatives, all the pros and cons. Should carbon steel or stainless steel be used in the piping system? What is the risk of corrosion? What would the repair cost be? The number of possible scenarios if Maggie had cheated on me is probably endless. I didn't want it to be a game of ask a stupid question, but that's how it turned out. After dinner, we were offered a walk around the grounds. Maggie insisted that I take her hand. The last time I held her hand was when she was giving birth to our youngest. After the walk, another bottle of wine awaited us. Maggie wanted to watch another movie. I agreed. And it was another movie about an unfaithful wife. I began to feel that this was becoming a theme. In the middle of the movie, I fell fast asleep on the couch. Maggie woke me up when the movie ended and was annoyed that I hadn't taken a shower after the bike ride. On Thursday, I was back in the conference room answering questions on the terminal. The questions started with my self-gratification habits, which I don't have. What do I fantasize about? Nothing. Do I read porn magazines? Number. Do I watch porn movies? Number. There were 100 questions about my self-gratification habits and porn viewing. Mr. Interviewer seemed disappointed when he got to my questions. And you don't read or watch porn? Let's be clear. I assume that since this is a seminar for married couples, we're talking about my habits as a husband, and therefore the answer to these questions is no. I believe that would be unfaithful to my wife. Have I seen porn magazines in college or school? The answer is maybe. And again, this fool was perplexed. On Thursday, I skipped lunch, went for a bike ride, and was late again for the meeting in the conference room, where I answered questions about various scenarios that I might find arousing. Would I enjoy watching an attractive young woman undress? Number. Would I enjoy watching an attractive young woman have sex with a man? Number. Would I enjoy watching an attractive young woman have sex with another woman? Number. Would I enjoy watching an attractive young man undress? Number. Would I enjoy watching an attractive young man have sex with another man? God, no. Again, this jerk didn't interview me, and I spent more time on my bike until Maggie called me in for dinner. After dinner, we watched 50 Shades of Grey with a bottle of wine. A movie about a young woman who experiences bondage, which I found disgusting. Shortly after the movie started, I started drinking wine straight from the bottle and fell asleep halfway through. Maggie tried to wake me up to go to bed, complaining that I smelled bad. It was our 4th day there, and I hadn't showered since the first day, even though I had been working out furiously on the bike for hours. On Friday morning, we had another session with Mr. Guru, who asked us how we were enjoying the sessions. Maggie raved about how honest she felt her answers and interviews were. He asked me what I thought, and I replied that I liked the exercise bike. I hear that, he said, but what about the interviews? I consider myself a well-balanced person, and I know who I am, what I like, and what I don't like. If you ask me the same question 10 times, you'll get the same answer. I believe in God, I believe in my wedding vows, and I believe in being true to yourself. You need a good moral compass in this world, and I intend to stick to mine. Mr. Guru seemed just as puzzled. We spent the rest of the morning session discussing nonsense. I skipped lunch again and got back on my bike. Maggie was losing patience with me for being late for the afternoon session. It was the same conference room, only this time there was a machine that looked like an electrocardiogram, and all its wires were connected to different parts of my body, including my penis. Then I had to watch various pornographic films. I started to argue, and they said that if I found a video offensive, I could skip it after 5 seconds. I don't think they believed my answers to the explicit questions because many of the videos were similar. There were not only young, attractive women in different scenarios, but women of all ages, and the same with men. There were all kinds of combinations, and I skipped them as quickly as possible. The only thing I watched for more than 6 seconds was a video where a woman who looked like Maggie was having sex with a guy who looked like the one I saw in the lobby on the first day. For a moment, I wondered if it was Maggie, but in any case, I found it offensive and skipped it. There was no interview, and I spent more time on the bike until Maggie called me for dinner. After dinner, there was the obligatory movie about couples dealing with infidelity in marriage. There was no guilt. There were some statistics about divorce, but the film focused more on couples who accept some infidelity and on husbands or wives who encourage their spouses to enjoy other partners. There was a segment about how many men enjoy watching their wives have sex with other men. On the 5th day, it became clear why Maggie wanted to come here. I went to bed without saying goodnight to her. Maggie came to bed and tried to snuggle up to me, but my smell repelled her. She asked me to do something about it, and I moved to the couch. In the morning, I skipped breakfast and went for a bike ride. We had morning and afternoon classes with Mr. Guru. Maggie was furious when I showed up 15 minutes late, still covered in sweat. Mr. Guru started by asking what I thought of the movie. I think it's mostly nonsense. Recent studies have shown that open marriages or cuckoldry rarely last longer than 3 years, and you didn't mention that. Furthermore, some marriages manage to survive infidelity, but this usually happens when there are young children in the family, and even in such cases, the marriage most often falls apart when the children leave the nest. Childless marriages rarely survive infidelity. In any case, infidelity usually leads to revenge and a complete loss of respect between partners. Overall, I found the video to be very misleading and painting a picture through rose-colored glasses. I stumped both Maggie and Mr. Guru, but I didn't stop there. And Maggie, was this whole charade to get me to accept your relationship with Robert Greene? Or did your sick mind think I'd want to watch you have sex with him? Maggie began to back away and asked, "Who is Robert Greene?" I went out into the hallway where he was listening and dragged him into the room. "That guy, Maggie. The one from your office who you didn't recognize on your first day here. The one you've been cheating on me with for the last 3 years. How is he any different from the dozens of other guys you've slept with over the last 12 years? "You knew," she said. "I've always known, Maggie, about all the other perversions you've been involved in over the years. But you never tried to rub it in my face. Although sometimes I wondered if you were rubbing it in my face or just acting like an idiot, and I usually leaned toward you being an idiot. Remember when we got burgled 15 years ago, and we installed a dozen security cameras in and around the house, and you were too stupid to remember that when your lovers were parading around in front of the camera at the front door? Why do you think I haven't wanted you for the last 12 years? Because you disgust me. Are we done? My exercise bike is calling me. Was today's session supposed to introduce me to the pleasure of watching that fat bastard Mr. Greene beat up my wife? If so, I won't be coming back." When I left, Maggie was crying, and Mr. Greene was trying to comfort her. Mr. Guru was stunned. I managed to find the pool when I got out and spent an hour swimming laps. After that, I fell asleep on one of the lounge chairs. Maggie woke me up and said it was time for dinner. She cried through most of dinner. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why, Maggie, why all this charade about wanting to strengthen our marriage?" "When the children left, I decided to stop hiding it and come clean. Robert thought you might enjoy watching us." "Did you really think I would let you humiliate me like that?" Robert and I watched the movie we saw last night, and I started to believe it was possible. After a couple of hours on the exercise bike, I took a shower. I couldn't stand the smell of sweat and chlorine. Maggie was watching some melodramatic movie. "I'm going to bed, Maggie. Please spend the night on the couch. I don't want to be near you anymore." In the morning, I spent a couple of hours on the exercise bike, took a shower, and went to jail to be released. Maggie and I walked out, and there were several cars waiting in front of the stairs, including ours. A man and a woman approached us. "Maggie, this is Peter Gray, my divorce lawyer. I may have mentioned his name." Then a young woman approached us and said, "Maggie Smith, you have a court summons," and handed her a manila envelope. Peter said, "The top document is a divorce petition on the grounds of adultery. Since your husband was the sole owner of the house, you must vacate it within 30 days. The third document notifies you of your husband's lawsuit against Mr. Greene for alienation of family. The fourth document notifies you of your husband's lawsuit against your employer for breach of moral code. Mr. Greene's wife is currently being served with notice of these 2 lawsuits. I strongly recommend that you find a good lawyer." I didn't notice that poor old Robert Greene had followed us. He was 5 meters away from me when he started lunging at me with threats to kill me. I seemed to slow down as the fat old man lunged at me, and one of the guys who had come with Peter pulled out a stun gun and shot him. Green looked like a whale trying to get back into the water. The guy took out his badge, arrested Green for making terrorist threats, and started reading him his rights. Maggie looked like she was about to pass out. I handed her the car keys. "Take the car home, Maggie, it's yours. I'm going on a long trip." Maggie stood there in shock. "What am I going to tell the kids?" "I recommend you tell them the truth, because that's what I'm going to do." I picked up my suitcase and put it in the extra car Peter had brought. The waiter drove away with him. When the car pulled away, Maggie was still standing there, holding the envelope in one hand and the keys in the other. Finally, Mr. Guru walked her into the house. That evening, I had dinner with the children and explained to them that I was divorcing their mother. They had never been sure that she was cheating on me, but they had always felt uncomfortable with all the older men who showed up only when I was away on business trips. They knew about the cameras and thought that if something was wrong, I would find out. "I can't believe she didn't think about the cameras," said my youngest. "Says the boy who parked a barrel for his party under a camera when his mother went on a trip with her colleague." The hardest part was explaining the trip to the resort their mother had dragged me to. I gave them links to the resort and several critical pages describing what it was really like. I watched their faces turn to horror as they read the reviews. The older son was the first to close his phone and, turning to his brother and sister, said, "I don't know about you, but she's dead to me. It's one thing to cheat on your father, which I don't think I can ever forgive her for, but to think that you want to watch some guy have fun with her? Does she even know you?" His brother and sister quickly agreed with him. Epilogue. My stay at the resort hotel was part of my divorce filing, and therefore public information. Due to the negative publicity, the resort was forced to close and was sold at public auction. Sarah Green, Robert's wife, divorced him, and the hospital fired him. Without a job, the bank took the house for debt. Through my lawyer, I arranged for her to live in my house. I felt sorry for her, another innocent victim of my wife's stupidity, and I had no intention of living there again. My children kept their promise not to let their mother into their lives. I couldn't be there for every Christmas, Thanksgiving, or birthday, but if I was in the States, I made sure to visit. Knowing she wouldn't be there made it easier for me. When my grandchildren came along, I lost interest in traveling. Green's ex-wife Sarah began insisting that I stay in the old house and threatened to leave if I didn't agree. I moved into the guest room. She's a beautiful woman, and maybe someday when I stop hating Maggie, I'll give her a chance. The only time we saw Maggie was at my youngest son's graduation ceremony. She didn't approach any of us. She just kind of hovered on the sidelines and disappeared as soon as the ceremony was over. I never tried to contact her. Maybe a few months later, I was sleeping in the guest room when Sarah climbed into bed with me. "We can't spend the rest of our lives hating Jack. Now hold me, please." I can say that Sarah spent the rest of her nights in my bed, and it's not appropriate to discuss everything that happened there. I will add that my children, their spouses, and grandchildren welcomed her warmly. She caught her husband with his mistress twice and didn't want to have children with him. My children filled that void, and Sarah easily slipped into the role of the loving grandmother that Maggie had left behind. It's been over a year since my wife started an affair with Howard Paddington. I didn't understand why I let it go on for so long. Maybe because it was convenient. Once I realized what was happening, I didn't care anymore. I waited patiently for the day when she would file for divorce. I didn't do anything to prepare except get myself in the right frame of mind. I accepted that she would take half of everything we had built together. She could have the house and the furniture for all I cared. The appraised value was less than the mortgage. We had enough money to pay for 4 years of college for our daughter Jenny. In another 3 years, I would have been eligible for retirement from the company, and she would probably have demanded a share of that money. Marcia was quite cautious in her relationships. The biggest problem was that Paddington worked for the same company as me. He was in a different department and 1 rank above me. At least he was single and quite handsome. I didn't like his arrogant attitude. It was easy for me to avoid him at work, and the only time I had to interact with him was at company events. Things quickly came to a head. Jenny left for her first semester at Pennsylvania State University, and Marcia and I were alone in the house for the first time in 18 years. Normally, this would have been a good opportunity for a couple to start a more active sex life, but not in our house. Marcia was always too tired or too busy, and I didn't care. It was Saturday morning. Marcia was taking a shower, and I was still reading the morning paper when the phone rang. I wasn't expecting a call, so I just turned on the answering machine. The message was interesting, to say the least. "This is Malcolm Jules. The engraving on your watch is ready and you can pick it up anytime, thank you." Well, that was interesting. I don't wear a watch and never have. I find it very uncomfortable to have something hanging on my wrist. Marcia had no reason to have anything engraved on her watch, and Jenny used her cell phone to check the time. I never rummaged through my wife's purse or anywhere else, but today I felt a strong urge to do so. The receipt from the jewelry store was tucked into the side pocket where she kept her credit cards. I read it carefully. 1 Teg Heuer Carrera watch with black alligator leather strap, engraving on the back cover, "Forever Marcia, $3,900 paid in full." I carefully put the receipt back in its place and grabbed a cold beer. I knew perfectly well that it wasn't for me. Marcia had just returned to the living room when I went outside to start mowing the lawn. It took me twice as long as usual to finish the job, but it gave me time to think things over. After dinner, Marcia told me she was going to spend the night at her sister's in Frackville. She didn't notice the broad smile on my face. I spent the rest of the evening getting my affairs in order. I had a whole year to do it, but I waited until the last minute. I berated myself for putting it off, but I was glad I had finally made the decision. She came home around noon on Sunday. We were friendly but hardly spoke. It was the longest Sunday of my life. I slept on the couch that night. Monday at work started normally until Howard started showing off his new watch to all of his coworkers. I had already resigned myself to putting up with it, but then he looked at me with a big grin on his face. Until that moment, he had always been calm and didn't show his feelings. But now he was gloating. Big mistake. I immediately took a week's vacation and then informed HR that I was ready to transfer to the Baltimore office. The new job came with a promotion and a raise. I turned it down several times because Marcia and Jenny didn't want to move. I spent the rest of the day at the bank and at my lawyer's office. I drew up a proposal whereby Marcia would get everything, but without alimony or a share of my future pension. She could take all the money left after paying for Jenny's education. Given the high cost of college, there wasn't much left. When I moved all my belongings into a small one-room apartment near work, my wife wasn't home. I took Tuesday off. On Wednesday, the divorce papers were delivered to Marcia. She called me. "John, do you want to explain anything? Do you want to discuss anything?" "No." "Why should I sign these papers?" "Marcia, this is long overdue and you know it. Signing the papers will just settle everything. I'm the one who's losing out. You're not losing anything and you're getting everything. You're not offering any support. I gave you 20 years and you're not offering anything. If I included alimony, it would only be until you remarry. I think that would be a waste of time. In any case, in 90 days, it will all be over. If you want to change something, I can guarantee it will take more than a year. I just want to move on." "I understand that you are really moving?" Oh, and who told you that? Of course, I knew the answer. Does it matter? Not at this point. There was a pause in the conversation. Marcia, I'm the one who's been hurt. They're making me move. I didn't do anything wrong, but I'm the one being punished. I've known all about Paddington for years. Just sign the damn papers. I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean for it to turn out this way. I'll give them to the lawyers tomorrow. It was a perfect opportunity to make her feel guilty, but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. On Friday, I went to work and cleared my desk. No one expected to see me, and several people expressed their disappointment that they wouldn't be able to throw me a farewell party. I wasn't in the mood for parties. It took less than an hour to complete the paperwork. Before I left, I called Jenny and explained the situation to her as best I could. "How do you tell your daughter you're leaving her mother without explaining why?" she asked once, then dropped the subject as if she knew what was going on. I couldn't understand how she couldn't have guessed. It had been going on for so long. I thought she understood everything. The trip to Baltimore was sad. All I could think about was the life Marcia and I had built together and how easily it had been destroyed. I had always planned to grow old with her. Now I had no plans for my old age. I didn't care anymore. Marcia never apologized for what she did, or even acknowledged it. We avoided the subject. Of course, we both knew what was going on, but neither of us wanted to be the first to bring it up. A person could go crazy thinking about all that shit. I turned on the radio. Who the hell was Lady Gaga? The new job was a piece of cake. I was, to put it mildly, retrained. Thanks to my competence and self-confidence, my subordinates felt comfortable. It was a good move. I kept in touch with Jenny, and she gave me all the information she knew about her mother. Howard moved in with Marcia at our house a week after I left. Jenny was unhappy, and I couldn't blame her. Marcia signed and agreed to all the terms of the divorce. She didn't even hire a lawyer. Everything was going according to plan, and all I had to do was wait. With 3 weeks to go before the divorce was final, I booked a 10-day Caribbean cruise. I hated cruises, but this one was necessary. The weekend before I left, I ran into some old friends from Atlantic City. I treated them to wine, dinner, and entertainment. It was nice to see my old friends. It was a long 10 days at sea. I couldn't decide what I disliked more, the food or the other passengers. At times, it seemed like at least 3 single women were following me around. At least, I thought they were single. I took advantage of every port of call to relieve my boredom. When I finally got home, I had visitors waiting for me. They were detectives from Baltimore, but they had come at the request of the Pennsylvania State Police. Howard Paddington's body had been found on the side of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. He had been beaten, apparently with a baseball bat, and died on the way to the local hospital. His wallet and watch had been stolen, so it was initially assumed that it was a robbery murder. When investigators discovered the relationship between Paddington and Marcia, I became the prime suspect. It took less than 30 minutes for local police to confirm that I had indeed been on a cruise for the past 10 days. Pennsylvania State Police did not deem it necessary to conduct a further investigation. There were at least a dozen messages on my phone. Jenny had told her mother about my cruise plans, but Marcia insisted on contacting me. Marcia knew I hated cruises. One of the calls was from Jenny, so I called her back. "Jenny, I just got back from the cruise. What the hell happened?" No one knows for sure. Mom is in shock. Howard didn't come home from work, and he was found on the highway near Downingtown last night. He was beaten and died before he got to the hospital. When did this happen? Last Thursday. Well, last Thursday I was in Cancun, so it wasn't me. Mom swears you're involved, but there's no proof. I just spent some time with the local police, and they seem satisfied with my story. Then why is your mother trying to contact me? She's desperate. She doesn't have you, and now she's lost Howard. She said something about wanting to stop the divorce. Can she do that? Not without my consent. If I had waited a few more days, I wouldn't have this problem. The next week was filled with phone calls from Marcia and a lawyer named Winstead. I ignored them all. 2 days before the divorce was finalized, a registered letter arrived requiring my signature. My secretary was able to delay delivery so I could leave the building. I spent the next 3 days in Atlantic City. Before returning home, I called my lawyer. He congratulated me on successfully evading Marcia's attempts to stop the divorce, then asked me for another $10,000 to cover his expenses. After a few awkward minutes, he started laughing. It was a bad joke, but it lightened the mood a little. Instead of money, he said he would settle for a steak dinner. It was worth it. I still thought it was a bad joke. I never understood why the police closed the investigation into Paddington's murder, or why I was never contacted again. Jenny called and congratulated me too, but of course with the restraint of a child witnessing her parents' divorce. Marcia was deeply depressed. Her sister Sherry was still living with her. It seemed like she had suddenly realized that she was going to have financial problems. Serious financial problems. I smiled as I hung up the phone. Over the next 2 years, I had no contact with Marcia. I didn't follow her or take an interest in what she was doing. I talked to Jenny every month, but we both carefully avoided talking about Marcia. All I knew was that she had lost her house to the bank and was working in a women's clothing store at one of the local malls. Marcia told Jenny that Howard had 2 insurance policies that named his mother as the beneficiary. Apparently, Puddington's mother wasn't willing to share. I had a few dates, but nothing romantic or sexual. Later that year, Jenny announced that she was getting married in June. I had met the guy a few times and was very happy with her choice. The wedding was to take place in Harrisburg, his hometown. Of course, Dad was going to pay for most of the expenses. I was more than willing to help in any way I could. The groom had many more relatives than we did, so it made sense. I agreed to walk her down the aisle if Jenny promised that I wouldn't have to sit next to Marcia or talk to her. She reluctantly agreed. I didn't want to ruin my daughter's wedding, but I felt that if I was forced to talk to Marcia, the chances of it falling apart would be much higher than if I just avoided her. Besides buying a tuxedo, I had one more thing to do to prepare for the wedding. I felt like the devil, or rather, my evil side had come out. The wedding was beautiful, as all weddings are. Jenny kept her word. Everything was carefully arranged so that Marcia and I could avoid each other without arousing suspicion. Although I was alone, Marcia was accompanied by a handsome man in his 50s. I never found out what their relationship was. Perhaps he was her colleague, neighbor, or new boyfriend. I didn't care. At the reception, Marcia and her date sat in the far left corner of the main table, and I sat in the far right corner. I waited patiently for the bride's father to give his toast. Standing up to speak, I crossed my fingers. It was a silly joke, but I still wanted everything to go according to plan. I'm right-handed, but that day I held the glass in my left hand. The words I spoke didn't matter, but the gesture I made toward the guests was very important. When I raised my left hand, the sleeve of my tuxedo slid down, revealing a beautiful Teg Heuer watch with a black alligator leather strap. I kept my hand raised longer than necessary so that all the guests could see the exquisite watch. A sudden gasp from the far end of the table told me that my mission was accomplished. I spoke a little longer than usual to gloat a little. When I sat down, I had a big smile on my face. Marcia saw the watch and recognized it. All the planning had paid off. A few minutes later, I saw my ex-wife and her companion leave the room. She was upset, but I couldn't tell if she was crying or not. I stayed for another hour, like a respectable father, and then quietly left and returned to my hotel room. I slept restlessly that night. I didn't know what Marcia would do, or if she would do anything at all. If she did nothing, I would know that she had accepted her fate and was ready to move on. If she was still hurt by what had happened, I might have some unexpected visitors. The answer came at 6 a.m. "Mr. John Terrell?" There were 2 of them, dressed in dark suits. I suddenly imagined Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones in the movie Independence Day. I laughed to myself as I answered, "Yes, how can I help you?" The man in the suit introduced himself and his partner, then asked to come in. They weren't local, but from the state prosecutor's office. I wondered who had woken them up so early in the morning. I offered them a seat while I put on my pants. I waited for them and had to get dressed before they arrived. There were only 2 chairs in the hotel room, so I sat down on the unmade bed. I deliberately took my time to get comfortable. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" "Are you John Terrell, who was at the Peterson-Terrell wedding yesterday?" "Of course. Jenny Terrell, now Peterson, is my daughter. We received a call saying that you were wearing an expensive Teg Heuer watch during the reception." I reached for the nightstand and picked up the large watch. "Yes, I was wearing that watch. Do you like it?" "That's not important, Mr. Terrell. We'd like to know where you got this watch." "Why? Can you just answer the question?" "No. First tell me why you need to know where I got it and who told you I had it, and then I'll answer your questions." "Mr. Terrell, we're trying to make this as easy as possible. Can you just answer the question?" "All right. I bought the watch on eBay. Now tell me why you need to know." "A watch just like the one you're holding was taken from the body of a man who was murdered in Downingtown 3 years ago." "I'm sure there are many watches that look like this one. Could you be a little more specific?" They seemed a little out of their depth. I got the impression that they were just going to drag me off to some government building to finish the conversation. "Mr. Terrell, do you know a man named Howard Paddington?" "Of course I do. I used to work with him, and he was my wife's lover, which, incidentally, led to my divorce." "Mr. Paddington had the exact same watch when he was killed. How do you know that?" My 2 visitors did not respond. "Was the watch on him when he was found?" They both shook their heads at the same time. "Do you think it could be his watch?" They were supposed to be controlling this informal interrogation, but they seemed to be losing control. "Who the hell told you that it was Howard Paddington's watch?" "Your wife, Mr. Terrell. Your wife identified the watch." "And how did she know it was his watch?" There was a moment of confusion. "She claims she bought it for him." "Maybe you should talk to her?" There was no response. "Is that all? Is that all you have?" "There's an engraving on the back of the watch that confirms her story." "Can she prove she bought the watch?" "She has the receipt." "Damn. I have the receipt too. Let me show it to you." They sat silently while I took the folded piece of paper out of my wallet and handed it to them. The older one looked at the piece of paper, then at me. "This is from eBay. It says you bought this watch for $49. "Yes, but I also paid $5 for shipping." "You bought a Teg Heuer watch on eBay for $49? "Not exactly. Look closely at the description." They both looked at the description and didn't notice the broad smile on my face. "It says Tig Heuer, not Teg Heuer." "There. Look at the face of the watch." The second man in the suit studied the face of the watch I handed him. He turned to his partner. "It says Tig Heuer. Gentlemen, did my wife buy a Teg Heuer watch for Mr. Paddington or a Tig Heuer watch?" Disappointment was evident on both men's faces. Things were not going as they had planned. "May we see the back of the watch, Mr. Terrell?" "You want to check the engraving?" "Yes. Would you mind?" "Not at all." I handed them the watch so they could examine it. I was proven right. I was putting on my shirt when they both stood up to leave. "Sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Terrell. Have a safe trip home." After they left, I closed the door and looked at the watch. I was glad I had spent the extra $20 on the engraving on the back cover. I turned the watch over and laughed when I read the old inscription in English. "Eat shit and die." It wouldn't have been difficult for them to check the serial number on the watch, but that wouldn't have given them the satisfaction. I drove back to Baltimore knowing that my wife was still angry with me for what I had done. I guess I couldn't blame her, but I hoped she felt at least a little remorse. I was upset because she still wanted to hurt me or get revenge. She was the one who cheated on me, not me. Maybe it was time for me to get revenge. I threw the Tig Heuer watch out the car window and took the real one out of the glove compartment. The difference was palpable. Before putting on the real watch, I read the inscription for the 1,000th time. Forever Marsh. I hated wearing watches, but maybe I'd get used to this one. I'll go all the way, like the old man with blue eyes said.